The sound of the slap didn't just echo through Mel's diner. It shattered the illusion that justice still existed in Riverside. One moment, 68-year-old Sylvia Fuller was reaching for a sugar packet. The next, she was sprawled against the vinyl booth, her pearl necklace scattering across the checkered floor, while Officer Justin Smith stood over her like a monument to unchecked power. He thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought the elegant woman in the pink blazer was just another victim he could silence. He didn't know that her trembling wasn't fear. It was the muscle memory of a woman who had stared down segregationists in courtrooms and won. And he certainly didn't know that the phone call she would make within the hour would trigger a legal reckoning that no union lawyer could stop. Riverside, North Carolina had a way of hiding its ugliness beneath Southern hospitality. But Officer Justin Smith didn't need to hide his cruelty. He wore it like his badge. Polished, prominent, and daring anyone to say a word about it. It was 11:15 on a Thursday morning at Mel's Diner, the only establishment in town that still served sweet tea in mason jars and grits the way they were meant to be made. Slow, buttered, and served with a smile. The air smelled of bacon grease and fresh biscuits. Sylvia Fuller sat in her usual booth by the window. At 68, Sylvia was a living monument of Riverside. She had dismantled Jim Crow laws in the local courts during the 1970s, defended voting rights activists without charging a dime, and mentored 2 generations of young black attorneys. She was petite, her frame refined by age, with silver-streaked hair styled in an elegant twist. Her hands, though marked by arthritis, were steady as she lifted her cup of Earl Grey tea. "Morning, Mrs. Fuller," the waitress, a young black woman named Tasha, said with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tasha looked nervous, her gaze darting toward the parking lot. "Can I get you a warm-up on that tea?" "Please, sweetheart," Sylvia said softly. "And maybe a slice of that lemon pound cake if Clara made it fresh this morning." The bell above the door didn't jingle. It slammed. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. It was like all the warmth had been sucked out of the room, replaced by something cold and predatory. Officer Justin Smith walked in, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with a clean-shaven face that looked boyish until you saw his eyes. Cold, calculating, empty of empathy. He had been on the force for 15 years, racking up complaints like trophies, protected by a union that treated brutality accusations like parking tickets. Smith didn't sit. He prowled. He walked between the booths with his hand resting on his service weapon, fingers drumming against the holster. "Top, top, top." He stopped at Sylvia's booth. Sylvia didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her tea, adding a slice of lemon with precision. "You're in my seat, Sylvia," Smith said. His voice was a low, menacing drawl. There were 8 empty booths in the diner. This wasn't about a seat. "Good morning, Officer Smith," Sylvia said, her voice measured, though her pulse quickened. "I wasn't aware this booth was reserved. There's no sign. It's reserved because I'm standing here." Smith smirked. He leaned down, placing both hands on the table, invading her space with practiced intimidation. "And I don't like the way you people think you can just take up space like you own the place. You people." The phrase hung in the air like a slur. "I've been sitting in this booth every Thursday for 22 years, officer," Sylvia said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, filled with a dignity that Smith despised because he couldn't strip it away. "I have as much right to be here as anyone." Smith's jaw tightened. He reached out and flicked her teacup. It wasn't a violent shove, just a calculated nudge. The hot liquid sloshed over the rim, cascading onto the table and splashing onto Sylvia's pink blazer. Sylvia gasped, standing abruptly as the scalding tea soaked through the fabric. Dear Lord. Clumsy, Smith said flatly, his face expressionless. Look at the mess you made. You expect Tasha to clean that up? You did that. Tasha blurted from behind the counter, her voice shaking with outrage and terror. Smith's head snapped toward her, his glare sharp enough to cut. Tasha shrank back, her hand flying to her mouth. Smith turned back to Sylvia, who was frantically dabbing at her blazer with a napkin. Apologize, Smith demanded. Sylvia paused. She looked at the officer, disbelief warring with pain. You want me to apologize for you burning me? I want you to apologize for making a scene in my town, Smith hissed, stepping closer. And for looking at me like you're better than me. You're nothing, Sylvia. Just an old woman who doesn't know when to sit down and shut up. I will not, Sylvia said, her voice rising with the authority of someone who had defended constitutional rights in federal court. I have lived in this town longer than you've been alive, Justin Smith. I knew your mother. I know what she would think of the man you've become. I will not apologize to a bully. Bully. That word was the match. Smith's face flushed crimson. Without thinking, without hesitation, he swung his open hand. Crack. The sound was sickeningly sharp. The force of the slap knocked Sylvia backward. She stumbled, her hip catching the edge of the booth, and she collapsed to the floor. Her glasses flew off, skittering across the tiles. Her pearl necklace broke, beads scattering like tiny witnesses. Don't you ever disrespect me, Smith roared, pointing down at her crumpled form. You hear me? You don't talk back to the law. Sylvia lay there, stunned. Her cheek was already swelling, a handprint blooming red against her brown skin. She tasted copper, blood from where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. Smith looked around the room, his chest heaving, daring anyone to intervene. The construction worker in the corner booth looked down at his plate. The elderly white couple by the door grabbed their check and hurried out. The line cook turned his back. Fear was the currency Justin Smith traded in, and business was booming. Get her out of here, Smith spat at Tasha. And if I see her parked crooked in this lot again, I'm writing her up for obstruction. Smith adjusted his belt, straightened his uniform, and walked out of the diner, leaving behind a wake of silence and shame. Tasha rushed to Sylvia's side, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Fuller. Oh my God, Mrs. Fuller, are you okay? Sylvia let Tasha help her up. She was shaking, not from tears, but from the Herculean effort it took not to break this man's wrist the way she'd been trained in the self-defense classes she still took at the community center. She picked up her broken glasses. One lens was shattered, a spiderweb of fractured glass. I'm all right, baby, Sylvia whispered, though her voice trembled. I'm all right. I'm calling the police, wait. Tasha's face crumpled. He's the police. Mrs. Fuller, what do we do? I'll call the state police. I'll call the mayor. No, Sylvia said firmly. She dusted off her blazer. She touched her cheek, wincing at the heat radiating from the bruise. You won't call anyone, Tasha. It won't do any good. It never does. But Sylvia was lying. She limped to her car, a well-maintained sedan that had never been parked crooked a day in its life. She sat in the driver's seat, took a deep breath to steady her hands, and reached into her purse. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the one labeled simply, Keisha, work. She dialed. It rang once, twice.
Major Fuller, JAG Corps.
The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and immediately alert. Keisha. Sylvia's voice finally cracked, tears spilling over. Baby, it's Mama. The tone on the other end shifted instantly, from professional to razor-sharp. Mama. Keisha's voice dropped an octave. Mama, what's wrong? Why are you crying? I had some trouble at the diner, sweetheart. Define trouble. Keisha's voice went cold. Dangerous. Officer Smith, Sylvia whispered. Justin Smith. He hit me, baby. He slapped me in front of everyone. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of a prosecutor who had just been handed a case. It was the silence of a daughter who had just been given a target. I'm coming home, Keisha said. Baby, you're at Fort Bragg. You can't just. I said I'm coming home, Mama. Keisha's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You pack a bag. You're not staying in that house alone tonight. I'm making calls. Do you understand me? Keisha. Do you understand? Yes, baby. The line went dead. 48 hours later, a silver Audi Q5 with Virginia plates rolled past the Welcome to Riverside sign. The SUV moved through the town like a scalpel through skin, precise, purposeful, and sharp. Behind the wheel sat Major Keisha Fuller. To the people of Riverside, Keisha was a memory. She had left town at 18, a brilliant student who got a full ride to Howard University, then law school, then the military. She rarely came back. When she did, she was polite, composed, and always wore pearls like her mother. But the woman driving the Audi wasn't the studious girl anymore. At 36, Keisha Fuller stood 5 feet 9 inches in her stocking feet, with her mother's sharp cheekbones and her father's uncompromising gaze. She wore her natural hair in a sleek bun, a tailored navy suit, and carried herself with the authority of someone who had prosecuted war criminals at The Hague. Keisha wasn't just JAG Corps. She was a decorated military attorney who specialized in civil rights law and federal prosecution. She had taken down colonels for sexual assault, dismantled trafficking rings in Eastern Europe, and advised Congress on military justice reform. She had just finished a deposition at Fort Bragg when her mother called. She had taken emergency leave, made 3 phone calls, one to her commanding officer, one to her contact at the ACLU, and one to a former colleague at the DOJ Civil Rights Division, and driven straight through the night. She hadn't slept in 2 days. She didn't feel tired. She felt the cold, clarifying rage of someone who had just been handed a righteous cause. She pulled up to her mother's small brick house with the rose bushes out front. The grass was neatly trimmed. The American flag her father had been buried with still hung by the door. She walked inside. Mama. Sylvia was in the living room, folding laundry with methodical precision, the way she did when she was trying not to think about something. When she turned, Keisha felt the air leave her lungs. The bruise was horrific, purple and yellow, spreading from her mother's cheekbone down to her jaw. Her lip was split. There was a small bandage on her temple. Keisha didn't say a word. She crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her mother in a careful, gentle embrace. I told you not to come, Sylvia scolded softly, though she held her daughter tight. You have important work. Cases. Nothing is more important than this, Keisha said, pulling back to examine her mother's face. She touched the edge of the bruise with her fingertips, her jaw clenching. Smith. He was just in a mood, baby. You know how some of these officers are. It's not worth. Mama. Keisha's voice was quiet, deadly. Don't. Keisha walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, her mind already assembling the case like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Has he bothered you since? He drove by yesterday. Slow. Just watching the house. Keisha nodded. Good. I want him to watch. I want him to feel comfortable. Confident. Keisha, Sylvia said, her voice filled with worry. Baby, don't you go down to that station and make a scene. He has the union. He has the whole department. You're just. I'm not just anything, Mama. Keisha turned, And for the first time, Sylvia saw the transformation. This wasn't her daughter. This was Major Fuller. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to build a case. And I'm not alone. She pulled out her phone. She opened her contacts and started a group text labeled Riverside Civil Rights Violation. Recipients: Marcus Chun, investigative journalist, ProPublica. Reverend Elijah Stone, NAACP, Riverside Chapter. Patricia Williams, NAACP Legal Defense Fund. James Okonkwo, DOJ Civil Rights Division. She typed a single message: assault on elderly black woman by officer with documented history. Witnesses. Video likely exists. Need full team. Riverside, NC. This is the one. 3 seconds later, a reply came from Marcus Chun. On my way. Bringing cameras. Another from Patricia Williams. I'm in Durham. There in 90 minutes. Another from Reverend Stone. The community is ready. We've been waiting for someone to fight back. Keisha looked at her mother, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a prosecutor who had just been handed a guilty defendant. Mama, she said quietly, Justin Smith has no idea what he just started. Riverside wasn't always a town that whispered. In the 1970s, Sylvia Fuller made sure it roared. Fresh out of law school with fire in her belly and a briefcase full of desegregation briefs, she had walked into the Riverside County Courthouse and dismantled 50 years of separate but equal lies in a single summer. The school board had fought her with every procedural trick in the book, but Sylvia knew the law better than the men who tried to weaponize it against her. By September 1974, black children and white children sat in the same classrooms for the first time in the county's history. She had done it with facts, precedent, and a cross-examination style so precise that opposing counsel nicknamed her the Scalpel. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She simply carved the truth out of every witness until there was nothing left but accountability. For decades after, Sylvia Fuller was untouchable. Respected. Even the old guard who had fought her in court eventually tipped their hats when she walked by. But Riverside had short memory and long grudges. The children who had integrated became adults. Some left. Some stayed and forgot. And a new generation of officers joined the force. Men who hadn't lived through the battles Sylvia had won. Who saw her legacy not as armor but as arrogance. Officer Justin Smith was one of them. He didn't care what Sylvia had done in the 70s. To him, she was just another black woman who thought she was special. Another target who needed to be reminded of her place. And for 15 years, he had been reminding people. With traffic stops that turned violent. With arrests that didn't stick but left scars. With a brutality complaint file so thick the department kept it in a locked drawer. Until now, no one had been able to stop him. The diner stayed frozen for a full 30 seconds after Smith walked out. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Sylvia's ragged breathing and the soft clink of her broken pearls rolling across the floor. Tasha helped her to a chair, pressing napkins against the cut inside Sylvia's mouth. Blood seeped through the white paper, bright and accusing. Someone call an ambulance. The construction worker finally mumbled, though he didn't reach for his phone. Don't, Sylvia said quietly. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Her hands were shaking. Her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. And the metallic taste of blood mixed with humiliation in a way that made her stomach turn. The door swung open again. Everyone flinched. Smith stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun, his face unreadable. He looked directly at Sylvia, then at Tasha, then at every witness in the diner. Just so we're clear, he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. Anyone who wants to file a complaint about what happened here today is welcome to try. You all know where the station is. He paused, letting the silence build. You also know what happens to people who do. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Everyone in that diner knew about Marcus Webb, who filed a brutality complaint and got arrested for drug possession 2 weeks later. Everyone knew about the Johnson family, who complained about a traffic stop and suddenly found their small business failing every health inspection. Everyone knew that challenging Officer Justin Smith wasn't brave. It was suicide. Smith smiled. Have a blessed day, folks. Then he was gone. And Riverside stayed silent the way it always did. Keisha sat in her office at Fort Bragg, surrounded by case files on procurement fraud, when her mother's call came through. The moment she heard Sylvia's voice crack, something inside her shifted. The grief lasted exactly 15 seconds. Then the prosecutor took over. I'm handling this, Mama. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll call you back in an hour. She hung up and stared at her desk. Then she picked up the phone again. The first call was to Colonel Anderson, her commanding officer. Sir, I need emergency leave. Family crisis. Medical assault. I'll have documentation within 24 hours. Keisha's voice was steady, professional. Anderson knew better than to ask questions when she used that tone. Approved, Major. Keep me posted. The second call was to Rachel Goldstein at the ACLU. They had worked together on a military sexual assault case 2 years ago. Rachel, I need everything you have on civil rights violations in rural North Carolina. Specifically, Riverside PD, officer named Justin Smith. Rachel's voice sharpened. Smith? Oh, Keisha. We've had our eye on him for 3 years. We just couldn't get witnesses to cooperate. You have one now, Keisha said. My mother. The third call was to James Okonkwo at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. They had been colleagues when Keisha did a rotation at DOJ before joining JAG. James, I'm calling in that favor. I need a federal civil rights investigation opened. Excessive force. Racial intimidation. Pattern and practice. James didn't hesitate. Send me everything. If it's what you say it is, we're in. Keisha hung up, grabbed her go bag, and headed for the door. The war room was about to open. By Friday evening, Sylvia's dining room looked like a federal operations center. The table where she usually served Sunday dinner was now covered with laptops, legal pads, and a whiteboard propped against the china cabinet. Keisha had pushed the chairs against the walls to make room for the team. Marcus Chun arrived first, hauling in camera equipment and a laptop loaded with forensic software. He was a Pulitzer finalist who specialized in exposing police corruption. I've been tracking Smith for 18 months, he said, setting up his workstation. He's dirty. I just couldn't prove it until now. Reverend Elijah Stone came next, a tall man in his 60s with kind eyes and a voice that had led protests for 40 years. The community is scared, Keisha, but they're ready. I've got 12 people willing to testify about Smith if you can guarantee protection. He carried a leather notebook filled with names, dates, incidents that had never been reported. Attorney Patricia Williams was the last to arrive. She walked in wearing a power suit and carrying 2 briefcases. I've filed Section 1983 civil rights suits in 7 states, she said, shaking Keisha's hand. Smith's department has qualified immunity arguments, but they're weak. We can pierce it. Keisha stood at the head of the table, looking at her team. Behind her, Sylvia watched from the kitchen doorway, a bag of frozen peas pressed to her cheek. All right, Keisha said, uncapping a dry erase marker. We have 72 hours before Smith gets comfortable again. Let's build the case that ends him. The war room was open for business. Marcus worked through the night, his fingers flying across the keyboard. By Saturday morning, He had filed 17 Freedom of Information Act requests with the city, county, and state. By noon, he had responses from sources inside the department who had been waiting years for someone to listen. 23 complaints, Marcus said, spreading printed documents across the table. All filed, all buried. Look at this. He pointed to a complaint from 2019. Excessive force during a traffic stop. Witness statements, photographs of injuries, medical records. Case closed after 2 weeks. Insufficient evidence. Patricia flipped through the files, her expression darkening. 5 excessive force incidents with documented injuries. 3 racial profiling lawsuits that were settled out of court with NDAs attached. The city paid out $130,000 in the last decade to make Smith's victims disappear. Reverend Stone added his findings. I found 4 families who were too scared to go on record before. They'll talk now. Smith has a pattern. He targets people he thinks won't fight back. Elderly folks, single mothers, people with prior records who think no one will believe them. Keisha studied the financial records Patricia had subpoenaed through emergency court order. There's a $47,000 discrepancy in the evidence locker. Smith's been logged as the supervising officer for 38 seizures in the last 3 years. The math doesn't add up. Then Marcus dropped the bombshell. I got the diner footage. The owner, Clara, gave it to me. She was terrified, but she did it. He opened his laptop and turned it toward Keisha. And I found Michael Torres, the construction worker who was there. Smith visited him that night. Told him to forget what he saw. The pattern wasn't just emerging. It was screaming. Marcus brought in reinforcements on Sunday. Her name was Dr. Aisha Patel, a digital forensic specialist who had testified in federal court 43 times. She looked like a grad student but worked like a surgeon. Bodycam footage is never truly deleted, Aisha explained, connecting her laptop to a hard drive Marcus had obtained through a source at the police department. Even when officers think they've erased it, the data remains on the server. It's just marked as available space. If you know where to look. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, running recovery software that peeled back layers of deleted files like an archaeologist brushing away dirt. Got something, she said after 2 hours. The team gathered around the screen. The first video was from 8 months ago. Smith's body cam showed a nighttime traffic stop. A young black man, maybe 19, hands on the steering wheel. Smith approached, ordered him out, conducted a search. Then the angle shifted as Smith leaned into the car. When he stepped back, he was holding a small bag of white powder. Well, look what we have here. But Aisha rewound it, played it frame by frame. Watch his left hand. See that? He palmed it, planted it. The second video was worse. Smith arresting a black teenager outside a convenience store, slamming him against the hood. You N-words never learn, do you? This is my town. You're just visiting. The slur was crystal clear. Undeniable. Patricia leaned back, exhaling slowly. That's a federal civil rights violation. Criminal. And we have it in 4K. Keisha's expression didn't change. She simply nodded. Now we have everything, she said quietly. Now we end him. Smith made his first mistake on Monday morning. He walked into the Riverside Police Department and filed an official incident report claiming that Sylvia Fuller had verbally assaulted and threatened him at Mel's Diner, and that he had used minimal necessary force to de-escalate the situation. Marcus's source inside the department photographed the report and texted it within the hour. Keisha read it aloud to the team, her voice steady. He's claiming self-defense. He's documenting his own lie. Smith's second mistake came Monday evening. He drove to Mel's Diner after closing and knocked on the back door where Clara was doing inventory. Marcus had anticipated this. He'd placed a camera across the street in his rental car, aimed at the back entrance. The footage showed Smith leaning against the doorframe, his body language casual but his words anything but. Clara's lawyer would later transcribe the audio. "You're a smart businesswoman, Clara. Smart people don't get involved in things that don't concern them. That old woman was out of line. You didn't see what really happened, did you?" Clara's voice was shaking. "I saw what I saw, Officer Smith." "No," Smith said, his tone hardening. "You saw an elderly woman slip and fall. That's what you saw. Because if you saw anything else, well, health inspections can be real thorough, real expensive. You understand." Clara understood. But so did the camera. Patricia added the footage to the evidence file. Witness intimidation, obstruction of justice. "He's writing our indictment for us." Smith thought he was protecting himself. Instead, he was building his own cage, one documented threat at a time. Wednesday at noon, Mel's diner was packed. But not with customers. National news crews lined the sidewalk. Cameras from CNN, MSNBC, and every local affiliate within 200 miles pointed at the makeshift podium Reverend Stone had set up near the entrance. A large screen had been mounted on the diner's exterior wall. Keisha stood at the podium in her military dress uniform, flanked by James Okonkwo from the DOJ Civil Rights Division, Patricia Williams from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and 2 FBI agents in dark suits. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "My name is Major Keisha Fuller, and 8 days ago, my mother, Sylvia Fuller, was assaulted in this diner by Officer Justin Smith of the Riverside Police Department." Her voice was calm, clear, prosecutorial. What Officer Smith didn't know is that his assault was part of a 15-year pattern of civil rights violations, excessive force, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. She nodded to Marcus. The screen flickered to life. The diner footage played first. The slap, the violence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then the Bodycam footage. The planted drugs. The racial slur. The brutality. Then the recording of Smith threatening Clara. By the time the evidence reel finished, reporters were shouting questions. "Federal charges will be filed within the hour," James announced. "Criminal civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, witness tampering, and conspiracy." 3 miles away, at the Riverside Police Department, Justin Smith sat in the break room watching the press conference on TV, his face draining of color. The door opened. 2 FBI agents stepped inside. "Justin Smith, you're under arrest." The handcuffs clicked shut. And for the first time in 15 years, Smith was powerless. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Marion Chin didn't hesitate during sentencing. "Mr. Smith, you violated the constitutional rights of citizens you swore to protect. You weaponized your badge. You silenced the vulnerable. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Smith's face went pale. His lawyer objected. The gavel fell anyway. Federal Correctional Institution Cumberland received inmate hashtag 47832-084 on a gray Tuesday morning. Justin Smith walked through intake in an orange jumpsuit, stripped of his badge, his authority, his power. He was assigned to a cell block where the guards didn't know his name and the inmates didn't care about his excuses. On his first night, lying on a thin mattress in a 6x8 cell, Smith finally understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be vulnerable, to know that no one was coming to save him. 6 months later, Mel's Diner reopened with a ceremony. A bronze plaque hung beside the door, in honor of Sylvia Fuller, Champion of Justice, Pillar of Riverside. Inside, the booths were full again. Laughter returned. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. At Sylvia's usual booth sat the new police chief, Jasmine Carter, a black woman with 20 years of community policing experience. She sipped sweet tea across from Reverend Stone, discussing the new civilian oversight board. Sylvia walked in, wearing a lavender blazer and a rebuilt pearl necklace. Tasha greeted her with a hug. "Your usual table, Mrs. Fuller?" Sylvia smiled. "Yes, baby. My usual table." Justice hadn't just been served. It had been restored. And Riverside was finally learning to breathe again. Please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real, and hit subscribe with the notification bell on, so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching and stay safe out.